tuning into Convos con Cathy. This is a people powered campaign solely funded and powered by working class people like you and me. This is important because while other politicians are taking funds from real estate developers and police unions and will be beholden to them when they take office, if they take office, we will only be beholden to working class people like you all. All funds will be used to disseminate our platform with pamphlets, flyers, merch, and promotions online and in newspapers. Please consider donating now by clicking the link in my bio. Well, thank you, Aya. Today we have Aya joining us. Thank you, Aya, for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me, Kathy.
So Aya is a longtime activist, a member of the Answer Coalition, Act Now to Stop War and End Racism, and is of Moroccan descent, North African descent. And we're gonna be talking about a few topics today. We're gonna be getting started on Afghanistan and what's happening right now in Afghanistan with the Taliban takeover, which everyone is very, very scared about, and people seem to think that um that if the United States were still there or would have continued their occupation of Afghanistan, women would have been freed and all of these things. And then we're gonna be talking about a little bit about the earthquake that Haiti just had, that has led to over I think it's over 2,000 Haitians that have passed away as of now. I think it's a little bit more, but almost 2,000 Haitians that have passed away because of this earthquake. We're going to be talking a little bit about the infrastructure there. And we're going to be talking about policing in terms of street vendors. And we'll see how much more we could get in within the next about 40 minutes now. So I am Afghanistan at this moment. Biden is pulling out all of his troops in about 7 days. The Taliban has been able to take over most of the country of or at least very stronghold cities of Afghanistan. Even though the United States was there for 20 years, supposedly fighting the Taliban. How is it so that they've been there 20 years fighting the Taliban, which is a fundamentalist extremist group? But in just 7 days after the U.S. left, they were able to basically, take over again.
Yeah, it's really jarring to see. I feel like a lot of people might not understand what's going on because we've been told that the U.S., entered this war in 2001 to defeat the Taliban, to take them out of power, and that was their goal. And now, suddenly, the Taliban is taking over the entire country. There's people fleeing, like running away in airports. There's people like trying to get on planes, like holding onto tires and like falling from the sky as the plane's taking off. Like it's really intense. So yeah, to make sense of this, we have to understand that the U.S. doesn't just get involved in a specific country to protect that country's people. And often, what they say they're gonna do is just propaganda. Like they were saying after 9/11, we need to fight terrorism. But what we don't talk about is that the Taliban would never have existed if not for the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
So the U.S. actually funded this fundamentalist type of ideology in Afghanistan to destabilize the socialist government that was elected by the people, that was indigenous, and that was popular. And now, after this invasion, as we see, these fundamentalists are only getting more stronger because there's more chaos in the country. Like,
Mm-hmm.
does Afghanistan have its own government? No. Like, the government they had now was just a puppet. It was a US backed government that was weakened throughout the years. So, how do you expect them to fight on their own against the Taliban when they've been decimated, when they don't have a state? The US has been occupying them for all this time, and they haven't been able to build their own way of organizing society. Like hospitals have been destroyed, infrastructure is destroyed, things that are important to run a state and provide for the people. And sovereignty is also not there. Like, does everyone in Afghanistan get a say? No, they don't. This is just a situation perpetuated by the U.S. And I bet they like it. Like, I do not believe the U.S. war machine is looking at this and saying, "Oh no, the poor women of Afghanistan won't have access to education." I think they're like, "Nice. We have another failed state. We have another completely a country completely in disarray, and we can just exploit their resources and feed them even more." This. So, yep, short story, but there's a lot to get into.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point because I think the United States, and if we look at all of the mainstream media led by the United States, the narrative that they're selling is, and this is a narrative that has been sold since 1492. All European colonial countries sell this. We went in there to save these brown people, right? To instill progressive values of democracy and freedom. And as soon as we leave, if we leave them by themselves, there will only be chaos because brown people are not capable of leading themselves, right? And this is an age old colonial rhetoric that has been sold to us since 1492. They did the same thing in Latin America, right? And that's what they say with Haiti, right? Which we'll talk to a little about a little bit later. But that's the rhetoric that they say about Haiti. Well, Haiti became the first in the independent Black republic, right? And that's why it has so many economic issues because
Hmm.
it became a decolonized state too quickly from the white man. But then what they don't show is really the way that these Western imperialist countries really ruin every single level of the economy, of the society, of people's lives, right? So let's look at Afghanistan. Afghanistan had a democratically elected socialist government from 1978 to 1992. Now, the one of the top priorities of this government was to bring equal rights to women. Okay, so if people, people should research this. The Democratic Republic of Afghanistan and their goals. It was written in their goals that their top priority was to grant women equal rights. Now, if the US cared about democracy, cared about women's rights, then why wouldn't they support this government, right? Because it wasn't in their economic interest, right? It was not, we know that Afghanistan is a country that is rich in petroleum, right? We know who was a Dick Cheney that had like a very huge oil company that in investments in oil companies in Afghanistan. We know that many politicians have oil company investments in the Middle East. So now, when we look at socialism, socialism is really about workers being able to own, to have a share of the profit that they produce, right? Which means that the United States wouldn't be able to just go there, take all the oil, pay Afghanistan a few cents and leave, because now they have a socialist economy where a large part of that profit has to go to Afghanistan and the Afghanistan people themselves, right? So then what did they do? They destabilized this government forcefully by funding the
Mujahideen.
thank you. Yeah, I'm like I don't
Yep.
yes. So then funding fundamentalist extremist groups, including Osama bin Laden.
Mm.
Osama bin Laden was empowered by the United States, right? He became empowered and became a big political figure in the Middle East by the United States because they trained him, funded him, and they actually were putting him up on newspapers as the hero against socialism during the time of while they were fighting the socialist government in Afghanistan. And then what do we see? Then we see that these fundamentalist extremist groups, now they want, they're very nationalist, and they want to control the area completely, right? And they kind of turned their back on the United States, right? And then we see the effects of that with 2001, September 11, 2001, where we know the Twin Towers fell. And what many people don't know is that the same fundamentalists that tore down the Twin Towers were the same ones that were empowered by the United States funding, and that the only reason that they did this that was really to protect their economic profit at the expense of Afghanistan civilians and at the expense at that point of U.S. citizens, because we lost, what was it, 2,000 people, right? And then they use 9/11 as an excuse to intervene in Iraq and Afghanistan, right?
Yep.
And when they do so, we now see a 20-year war that was created out of that. 150,000 Afghans were killed and murdered by the United States. We had schools that were bombed. We're talking about women and children that were killed and bombed by um, by the United States military. We see all levels of Afghanistan infrastructure completely destroyed. Every single level, even the political level, because we know that they put this puppet government there just for enough time so that they could reap and they could take all the oil, all the petroleum, all the natural resources that Afghanistan has to offer, and then leave, right? Without really creating a strong government that would actually bring about equality. No, they knew they weren't doing that. They were just staying there while they could take away and rob all the natural resources and then leave and continue this white supremacist colonial rhetoric, that the reason why the Taliban is taking over, the reason why Afghanistan is in the state that it's in, is because the white man left.
Exactly. And we can't also forget about the opium industry, which like fed the entire opioid crisis in America. And all of that is based on, like, you'll see American soldiers when they were occupying Afghanistan, like they were like go in poppy fields with guns, like to protect them, so they can keep exploiting that and getting opioids out of it. And similarly is for oil. Like they don't occupy a country so they can like protect people or whatever. They just go and deploy forces next to the resources that they're currently taking over. It's kind of like looting on a very large scale. And this is not only happening in Afghanistan, it's happening in every country where the US is occupying, like in Syria right now. In northern Syria, they're occupying a lot of oil wells, and Syrians cannot rebuild their country because they don't have fuel. We see Lebanon is running out of fuel as well. Just everywhere is being destabilized and their resources looted to the point where they don't have enough for themselves. That's basically what's happening. And we can't also forget the contractors that are on the ground. Like, yes, US troops left, but it doesn't mean there aren't any US interests still in Afghanistan, still trying to take advantage of the chaos. That's always what happens. When you don't have a force that's able to take over after this crisis that's going on, anyone can kind of take power wherever they have the ability. And like the Taliban are the most organized force right now in Afghanistan because when you're a militarized group and you have fundamentalist ideology and there's a occupation for 20 years and people have like nothing to eat and also there's weapons everywhere, it's really easy to grow and to become. It's kind of like warlords. Anyone who has the weapon is able to gain power. And we've seen that in so many countries that the US has destroyed. And like you said, it really plays into the narrative that you can't have the self-government of black and brown people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we have to disrupt this narrative and tell everyone about US intervention, because that's the root cause of why so many nations aren't able to eradicate corruption, for example, or have adequate infrastructure. I know Colombia is the same way. Like it's it's just true in all of the third world, like the global south in general. Um, And then when people do fight back, like in Haiti, they're destabilized and the economy is strangled in a way that makes them look like they can't function on their own.
Mm-hmm.
When it's actually the US that's stopping resources from getting to them. It's actually the global market that's being controlled by the US and by large imperialist powers that shuts them out. And under capitalism, you need to buy everything. So the market is central. Like you need to buy things from other countries. You can't just be self-sufficient in a small island or an impoverished country.
Right. Yeah, and I think one of the things that we also need to look at, we said petroleum, oil, but the weapons industry, right? The United States is the largest. I mean, if we look at the industries that receive the most amount of profits in the U.S., we know that the weapons industry, I believe, is number one. But I think what the United States exports more so than anything else, weapons, throughout the world. And literally, for each bullet that was being used, there was profit that was being made by U.S. gun corporations and gun manufacturers that are one of the biggest lobbying groups in the United States, right? So I think that in all ways we see how this is really not created um, because of that, because of lack of US intervention, but this is entirely created because of anti-communist US intervention. And I think I saw a meme earlier that said something like, oh, if you want to see what it looks like to have a war against communism, look at Afghanistan, right? And I think this is relevant to Cuba, right? We're saying
Right?
let Cuba live, right? Let Cuba live, take away the economic blockade, no US intervention. And the reason for that is because we are historians, right? As socialists, we have to be historians. I mean, I'm personally also a historian. I teach US history.
Yeah, me too. I
And
mean, I have a bachelor's in history.
yeah, yeah. So, but when we look at history, we see really a that wherever the US has gone in to destabilize a democratically socialist elected government, what we've seen the effects to be are the decrease in their economy, increase in violence, the destruction of their infrastructure, whether it's in Cuba, whether it's 2009 in Honduras, whether it's El Salvador, like wherever we look, whether it's in Colombia, where there wasn't a socialist government, but there was socialist resistance, right? What
Yeah.
happened? They began crushing that resistance. Now Colombia has the highest internally displaced amount of people in the world. Sometimes it comes second to Syria. They kind of like alternate. And then we see that the US had a large intervention in Syria. So where we look, if we just follow the money of the US and where they have intervened, we will see the largest amount of people that are displaced, the largest amounts of damage to the infrastructure. So when people ask us, why are we against US intervention in any country, but like let's say Cuba, because that was a hot topic about a week ago. Oh, what's going on here? Sorry, I don't know. Am I back? Okay. Yeah, so that was a hot topic about a week ago. All we really have to, the reason we make the decisions that we make, we take the stance that we take, is because we're students of history and we know that history repeats itself. And I think that if we take Afghanistan for example, anybody will be able to see why we are completely and totally against US intervention of any country, right? Because we know
Right.
that if they intervene, they will only be looking out for their corporate interests and not for the well-being of the people.
Yeah, let's talk about it. Like, would there be a weapons industry if there was no war? Obviously not.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they have to sell weapons to someone, and obviously, we can't have a $1 trillion Pentagon business. I mean, business. That was a Freudian slip that really shows. But budget.
Mhm.
If if they if we didn't have this many wars, and where does that $1 trillion go? It's basically coupons that they buy weapons with from their friends at
Yeah.
Boeing and like Raytheon, Elbit Systems, the Israeli company, just like all these companies. And so, yeah, they're using our tax dollars to buy stuff from their friends, buy
Mhm.
weapons, and then stockpile them and have the largest amount of weapons in the world, the largest amount of nuclear weapons in the world, and then go tell other countries that they have to demilitarize themselves.
Mhm.
um, yeah. So yeah, we have to end this. Like, we cannot have this bloated military budget anymore. They spent over $2 trillion in Afghanistan, and look what happened. All that happened is capitalists made even more money and used all our tax money to do that, and we didn't get anything out of it.
Mhm. And when people tell me like, "Oh, well, when they look at our platform and they're like, well, where would you get the money for to house everyone, right? And we have a plan on how to house everyone based on the New York City budget in New York. But let's talk about it on a federal level, right? We could house every single homeless person in the United States. We could, and then people are like, but they don't deserve it. Whatever, for whatever reason, let's make pretend you had the craziest story. You brought me one of these stories of this person that's like filthy rich and uses children to get donations, and the child isn't even there, and I've even heard they drug the children. Whatever story you make up, let's take that. Fine, boom, that's the story of one person, right? But if we have the money, right, but it's being used to kill innocent children, mothers, families. That money instead is being used to that. Why can't we use that money to house our own residents within the United States? Why can't we use that money so that we could pay off student debt, right? Which is one of the largest groups of debt that people have, that and healthcare bills. Why can't we give everybody healthcare, you know so the thing is that we have the money to pay off people's students debt. We have the money to house everybody. We have the money for healthcare for all. We have the money to meet all the basic necessities of everyone in the United States because we pay taxes for it. But the government is choosing to use that money to kill people abroad, not in the name of us. It's not for us. It's not for people like you and me, because do I don't get any shares from these petroleum companies that are making tons of money. I do not get any shares of profit from the weapons industry. Do you? I don't get a check.
Mm-mm,
We
nothing.
don't get checks from that. So what? So there, and people will tell me, are like, oh well, it's good if we're abroad and killing people because it's in our best interest, right? You'd be surprised.
Right, right.
I've talked
No,
to
I know.
very right
I
wing,
know.
and they'll be like, oh, it's in our best economic interest. It's in the interest of our safety and national security. Is it really? Because had we not gone there in the late 80s and 90s, would we have had 9/11? No, we wouldn't have. Is
Yep.
it really in our economic? So that's safety. So safety, no, it does not make us safer. But economically, does it make us better off? Does it boosts the economy, right? But the thing is that when we're the way that we look at successful economies should really be transformed to look at how the economy affects everyday people and our quality of life. Because what does it mean to boost the economy and boost the profit of the rich when at the end of the day we are not getting any shares or any profit of that, and we're just being robbed of our tax dollars?
Exactly. We're the biggest economy in the world, and we have 140 million people who are either poor or near poverty, which is like over 40% of population. So it really doesn't make sense to have a huge economy if you're not seeing that as a person just living here, working and making money for these big capital.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I just wanted to mention another point that's kind of related about, because everyone's talking about women and how if the US, like the US is doing enough now that the Taliban has taken over somehow, even though the US did the most for as long as they could to actually make this happen. But we talked about that. The other point I was gonna make is that, like, these like fundamentalist forces that caused 9/11 and caused so many terrorist attacks around the world, they always come from these countries that are being destabilized, like Libya. That's a huge area where militants go to fight. There's even Europeans that go there um, to train. Then there's also Syria, where that happened for a while. They were funding a bunch of different Islamist groups,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that caused, like, those same people would end up in Europe and then have terrorist attacks attacking people that are from these countries that funded them. So it does create insecurity around the entire world because of these US destabilization efforts. And also, it causes, like, the people who live in those countries, especially women and minorities, like religious minorities in each of these areas, to suffer. There's like a genocide of the Hazara people in Afghanistan that might happen because the Taliban are very fundamentalist and they don't accept different religious ideologies, like even within Islam, like sects of Islam that they don't agree with.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a factor. It's been happening across the Middle East where minorities are being targeted, and Shias, like ISIS had a huge um, campaign against Shias where they would just terrorize Shias across the Middle East. And also for women's rights, like, we have to understand that the US has funded Islamist tendencies like Wahhabism ever since decolonization movements began. Ever since there were secular nationalist movements and revolutionary movements in all of these Muslim majority countries that fought for land reform and fought for true equality, of the peasantry, of the working class, of people who were affected by colonialism and were dispossessed. And so the response was to fund these ideologies and to have Saudi Arabia as actually a sponsor because of its very close relationship with the US and the British, the monarchy there, like the Saud family.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would have mosques funded by them with imams that they have in their pocket. Like, it's a it's a whole ideology that interprets Islam in its own way, and it's very, very dangerous because it only pushes the most reactionary invention, really. Like, it's not real, but it's interpreted in a way that anyone who could be swayed for that ideology, like, could potentially think that that's real Islam.
Right.
Um, and so that's happened, like, as an anti-communist tactic. So we have to understand that the fact that there are these tendencies and that women's rights are threatened, for example, is directly connected to, like, trying to stop these ideologies that support rights for women, that support true equality for all people, that want to expropriate these international capitalists, like U.S. capitalists, capitalists from other countries that colonize these nations, and take that capital for the people. So we have to understand this whenever we talk about terrorism or Islamism, like, where it comes from, and it's not because people are crazy or because um they don't know how to govern themselves in a way that respects women or in a way that respects human rights. It's actually a very specific ideology that's been funded by the West, um, strengthened, really, in a way that's not indigenous, that's not coming from the people themselves.
Mm-hmm. And with that, thank you, Aya. I do want to move into a little bit about the topic of Haiti. So we know
Hmm.
that Haiti just had a magnitude earthquake of 7.2. The death toll is about 2,000 people that have passed. Close to 10,000 people are injured. People are frantically recovering bodies. It has damaged about 14,000 homes. We know that Haiti is only 78 miles. There's, people are lacking adequate shelter. And one of the things that we see is how vulnerable Haiti is to earthquakes, right? Because of the country's infrastructure and the way that it has been attacked by imperialist powers and colonial powers since its independence. So, for those of you that don't know, Haiti is the first Black republic, and first free Black republic that fought against their French colonizers and won. Right? It is, you know, all revolutionaries, but all people should really commend the history of Haiti, the revolutionaries of Haiti. It's something that we really have to live up to. And yet, we continue to hear this narrative, right? It's almost like they talk about Haiti being impoverished without giving any historical context, right? And even me as a teacher, when I talk to my students about Haiti, when we go over the Haitian Revolution, they're like, oh, well, Haiti's so poor. Haitians are just poor. That's it. That, it's just a poor country. Kind of the way that some people talk about, like countries, many countries around the world, where they're like, oh, that's just a poor country, right? And we need to understand that this narrative of calling a country poor without historical context of how Western imperialism has caused that poverty is in service of white supremacist capitalism. Okay, because it continues to create and support the narrative that we need white men, white people, white capitalists to lead our countries in order for them to be successful. When in reality, what we need is for them to leave us alone. So, Aya, can you shed a little bit of light into what into a little bit about the history of Haiti with France and what they had to pay after, and yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, as you said, Haiti, the first Black republic that was free and independent. It was also, in general, one of the first revolutions that were successful in the world. So it's definitely an inspiration for all of us. And so, for those who don't know, Haiti was colonized by France, and it was the indigenous people of Haiti were completely decimated. Um, um, and then they brought people, kidnapped people from Africa, and made them work for free. So obviously, this was a very, very, very lucrative colony for France. It was actually their most lucrative colony in their whole empire, which spanned every single ocean in the world and every continent. A lot of people don't know this about France, but yes, they were out there doing all the atrocities that all the others did. And so, yeah, when Haiti declared its independence, it was actually forced to pay a debt to France for the property that they lost, which is basically the people of Haiti, like as if they were a piece of property after being freed. Um, and so Haiti got into debt. They were basically forced to pay it. It wasn't like a choice. Actually, there were France was threatening to invade it again. And this is a newly independent country that's been ruined by slavery, where you have monocultures, you only have specific crops that you like cash crops that you grow. You can't grow your own food. You don't have like the infrastructure to build a state. And so imagine that plus you owe like billions of dollars to France, and also you have to like buy food from other countries in a world where there are not a lot of independent uh, nations to work with. It's mostly empires in all around the world. As you know, like Haiti helped to free Latin America from colonialism. So at the time, like everyone else was under an empire, Spain or Portugal or France, and so Haiti. That's why Haiti has been impoverished. So the initial payment that they demanded was 150 million francs, um, which is like the money they were using in France at the time. But at its peak, Haiti has had a total external debt of $2.1 billion. So they're still being indebted by the IMF, by banks. Also, I don't know if anyone here is aware, but like in 2010, there was another earthquake in Haiti, which was like really, really destructive. And we see how the West interacts with Haiti in this specific instance. Like it really shows how it's been interacting with Haiti ever since its independence, which is basically that they were like, oh, we need to help Haiti. We need to provide aid. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was doing this whole fundraising thing for Haiti. The Red Cross was doing it. There were so many governments like saying, oh, we must help Haiti. They're so poor over there. And then nothing happened. Like I know people from Haiti, like they didn't get any of that money. They
Mm-hmm.
raised billions and billions and billions of dollars. Um, so we understand that they're impoverishing countries, and then they're using um this humanitarian language, but they're actually just raising money for themselves. Like they're getting tax write-offs, they're doing their philanthropy, but actually it's not trickling down to the people themselves. So did they rebuild their infrastructure after that earthquake? Of course not. Did they improve the infrastructure they had already? Also no, because how can you do that if you can't even have your own independent government? If any time that you elect someone who wants to do these things, they're overthrown by the U.S. And if you want to raise your minimum wage and Hillary Clinton comes and says no, we have to keep it at half that. Um, so yeah, this is how Haiti has been impoverished, and this is why the earthquake is not a natural disaster, but it's actually an unnatural disaster that was that was created by this whole structural underdevelopment of Haiti and exploitation of Haiti. I also wanted to mention a small bit of context just about what recently happened, which is that the president turned dictator, Jovenel Moise,
Yes.
was assassinated at his home in Port-au-Prince, and uh, it's actually still kind of unclear. I know some U.S. allied mercenaries were connected to it, and Colombian citizens, I think. But
Mercy.
basically, yeah, mercenaries. But basically, this just shows like the amount of meddling in Haiti. Like Haiti has had a dictatorship under Papa Doc and Baby Doc for a while, and then they had their own socialist president, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, and then he was couped. So now that they've had this president who's been ruling by decree and who dissolved the parliament, they had a huge movement of people asking for him to step down, and the entire country was on strike. I know comrades went to see like what it was like, and so when you see people like rising up in such a strong way, I think the U.S. didn't believe that Moise was able to keep their interests okay, like to actually represent them with a good nice face, like just looking good as a government, kind of like Colombia, where I think Ivan Duque is like kind of he just knows how to talk more. I don't know, like he knows how to keep stuff under his lid.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they have a leader who doesn't do that, and then there's protests, and there's a revolutionary crisis, that's why they intervene to continue the turmoil.
It's kind
And
of
so, yeah, keep going. What?
like Trump.
Yeah,
That a lot of the things that Trump did, other presidents have done or are doing, but no, but he did it to such a open and bigot manner, and he was so verbally open about all of the ways he wanted to impose racism and xenophobic policies, and he was so open about it and didn't kind of like what do you call that, how do you call that, like paint over.
respectability,
Huh?
respectability.
Yeah, like he didn't, do it in the respectful way or use the right language to do it. That people became enraged, right? And for those of us that have been in the movement for a very long time, we know that a lot of the things that Trump was doing are things that we have been fighting against during Obama. during Bush, with the Clintons, not necessarily me because I'm not that old, but
Mm.
but like it's something that has been going on for decades under different presidents. But when it's different when a president is very vocal about it, and I think that that's what happened with the president in Haiti.
Yep.
hmm Thank you so much for that. And I did want to make a connection with that, right? Because as we see that we have more natural disasters, more flooding, more heat waves. I mean, we see this snowstorms even in New York, right? We saw July was one of them, one of the months with the highest level of rain. Then I don't know since when, but we barely had a summer here in New York. I think just now this month, but even now it's like cloudy already. We
Mhm.
rain, rain, rain. We're only going to expect it to get worse because of the fact that our government refuses to invest in environmental sustainability and things of the sort. But one of the things that we need to look at is like look at what happened in Florida, right? Where they had buildings that were made in very cheap ways that um, were collapsing, right? And that's something that is bound to happen throughout the United States if we continue to decide to use our taxes for the military, for the police, instead of housing mechanisms, right? um
Right.
and yeah, and I think that above all, like we said previously, all of this money that's going to kill people abroad, right, isn't serving us, isn't serving our national security. It's not serving our economic interests, and literally is robbing our families, our people, our community from many necessary resources like housing for all, right? Right now we're about to see the eviction moratorium end, and we could have canceled rents and mortgages. People are like, where are you going to get the money? The same place where we got the money to kill 150,000 uh
Mhm.
Afghans that didn't need to be killed. you know that same place we can get the same place we found $11 billion for the police, even though they only solved 2% of major crime. And now we're seeing the uptick of them, of the repression that police are having in our communities, right? Like with street vendors. I was reading a article today about a street vendor that was selling, I believe it was tacos throughout the entire pandemic, feeding his community, was is considered an essential worker. And now he's facing did he how much was it in fines? I think it was like 2,000.
Mhm.
Hold on. Let me
Yeah.
see. But it was, yeah, $2,000 in fines and violations, because he was operating without a food permit, a vending permit. So we see at every single level how the money that could be used to better our quality of life, the money that is ours because we pay it in taxes. And for those all of my teacher friends, how much we're getting taxed, so you know that it hurts, right, to get taxed so heavily and not receive our master's degree that we paid for to teach, to be able to be a public school teacher, to have that paid for because there's not enough money, to see our community housed and fed because there's not enough money, to see our street vendors be able, that were our essential workers, continue to have employment and stop being harassed, to see the end of police brutality and ICE and deportations in our community. So all that to say, we went through a lot of topics today, but
Mhm.
Afghanistan, going through the Haiti, going through where our money's going. At the end of the day, what we need is a government that at every point will put the needs of working class people instead of the interests of the wealthy. And it is possible to do that. It is possible to create this system. We But we need to fight for it. Nothing will be given to us unless without a struggle. Okay, so for all of you that are watching, that will be watching this live, please, please, do join our struggle. Volunteer with us. Learn more about socialism. Don't believe the lies that socialism is just dictatorship. Don't believe that. Learn for yourself. Read about it. Read history. And yes, please join us. Aya, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Kathy. We talked about so many things. I'd like to let everyone know if they want to learn more about Afghanistan, there's actually a lot of resources on Breakthrough News, which is a media outlet that you guys can find online. It's really important to learn the history behind everything like we talked about today. Thanks for the great discussion.
Yes. Yes, I love Breakthrough. Definitely, definitely do look out for Breakthrough. So before we end, I do want to remind everyone this is a people power campaign solely funded and powered by working class people like me and you. Any donation that you all can give to us, whether it's 5, 10, 20, $100, $200 would be great. Please consider doing so. Everything that you donate to us will be going specifically to disseminate our platform, our pamphlets, flyers, merch, promotions online, and newspapers, which will all help educate people about our goals as socialists in the United States. Thank you all so much. Have a good night.